Hey everyone, welcome back to another fantasy battle. Today we're going to analyze the fantasy fight between Palpatine and Count Dooku. Now, before some of you scoff and say, well, Palpatine would obviously win, and while you're probably right, I think it would be interesting to deep dive into their fighting styles, force powers, and overall psychology to see how the fight would really turn out. Would it be more difficult for Palpatine than the Jedi that he fought in his office? Or would it be easier? How would things go? So first, in order to do this, we have to discuss Dooku's powers and abilities and Palpatine's powers and abilities, as well as their lightsaber fighting styles. These videos are always interesting because they require us to really dive into the user's psychology as much as their physical endurance and abilities in the Force. So let's start with Dooku. Dooku was known as one of the best swordsmen in the galaxy. And that's saying a lot. He was trained by none other than Jedi Grand Master Yoda, and he was a very powerful user of the Force. Unlike Obi-Wan, for example, who really wasn't all that gifted at anything other than his sheer perseverance to be the best that he could, and his determination to be the best lightsaber Form 3 user that there was. Count Dooku, on the other hand, was actually very gifted with the Force and a very hard worker. Dooku used the second form of lightsaber combat, known as Makashi. Now, this form was designed specifically for fighting lightsabers, lightsaber to lightsaber combat. It was an old school style for an old school guy. When the time came to fighting against droids with blaster weapons, this form wasn't really encouraged all that much. And for this reason, Dooku using this style gave him a severe advantage over his enemies when they had lightsabers, and when they weren't used to fighting anyone else who used this form, let alone as good as he did. His curved hilt allowed him to be very precise with his attacks, as well as use the hilt's curve to create immense power on downstrokes at the last second, overwhelming many of his opponents. While Makashi had its weaknesses, such as with blasters and being a one-handed lightsaber form, Dooku was so masterful of it that these weaknesses turned into strengths for him. His Force powers were just as amazing as his abilities with a lightsaber. While many Force users can all do the basics such as push, pull, run fast, and jump high, Dooku was primarily gifted in moving objects with his mind, and again, with extreme precision. Just like his fighting form, Dooku took great pride in his telekinetic powers. Now, I would say the power that Dooku was the most proficient in was Force Lightning. While he did come in second place compared to Palpatine, of course, Dooku used his Sith Lightning to both intimidate, kill, and torture his enemies. In the run of Son of Dathomir, Count Dooku used lightning to torture Darth Maul, merely toying with the captured Zabrak. Often he would combine his two favorite powers, making someone float in the air and then frying them with electricity, much like what Vader does, only he chokes them. So now that we've looked at Dooku a little bit, let's look at Palpatine's powers, and then we can properly simulate their battle against one another. Now, it's no big news that Palpatine was extremely powerful in the Force and, of course, Force Lightning. He was gifted, I would say, with the dark side since he was a little boy. Notice how I didn't say the Force because Palpatine was really all just evil. His overall affinity to the Force was one thing, but it was his sheer rage and bloodlust that made him an unstoppable force. His lightsaber fighting style is something interesting to discuss, and here's a quote from Palpatine himself. "Despite being highly trained in the art of combat by my master, I rarely use these weapons. I prefer to call upon the infinite power of the dark side to win my battles. Yet, when the time came to reveal my true nature, few could survive the fury of my blades." Palpatine, while having a red Sith lightsaber of his own, in fact, two of them, as we know, and saw him use against Darth Maul and Savage Opress in the Clone Wars, wasn't really a fan of using lightsabers at all. He didn't care for them. He only used them to mock the Jedi, to make fun of them. He went so far with this prank that he actually mastered all 7 lightsaber fighting styles just to completely doo-doo on any Jedi he would ever come to fight. Kind of like in Revenge of the Sith, for example, when he fought Aegon Kolar, Saesee Tiin, Kit Fisto, and Mace Windu, each of which had different lightsaber fighting forms, and he just destroyed all of them. Except for Mace Windu, but that's a different story on its own. He used his knowledge and mastery of all forms to easily destroy his opponents, one to satisfy his ego, of course, and the other to portray how useless and pointless the Jedi were, that the dark side was the only true way to use the Force in all of its glory, not the dogmatic, narrow usage of the light side of the Force that the Jedi favored and instilled. He had mastered so many Force abilities such as the basics like telekinesis, push, pull, speed. In fact, his speed was so fast that when Anakin watched him fight Mace Windu in his office, the Chosen One's eyes himself couldn't keep up with him. He referred to Palpatine as a red blur in the Revenge of the Sith novel. Palpatine was also known as the Shadow in that book. He moved in the darkness, he was the darkness itself, and he was a blur in the night. He would use Force lightning to torture and toy with people, but if he ramped it up, he would incinerate and turn his enemies to dust. Just like at the end of the comic run by Dark Horse, Vader and the Ghost Prison, one of my favorite comic runs. His Force lightning was more powerful than Dooku's, and we can know this just by comparing how easily Yoda absorbed Dooku's in comparison to Palpatine's, to which he struggled immensely. He could create a Force storm that would cause confusion and pain to all inside of its whirlwind, slowing his enemies down as if they were in quicksand. Remember when Sidious choked Dooku through a hologram in the Clone Wars? That obviously requires effort and skill, and the ability to break through someone's Force bubble and Force shield requires a greater level of power. Now, while the answer of this duel is very clear, I find it's interesting and of course important to talk about each one's abilities, especially as Tales of the Jedi is out. Now, his powers didn't stop there. Palpatine was also versed in Sith magic, the likes of which we haven't learned enough about. He was able to open the portal in the world between worlds and create a lasso to drag Ezra towards him in Rebels. Palpatine is on another level entirely, and his Legends powers are even more crazy. If Dooku and Palpatine fought with lightsabers, it would be a bit more of a fair match. However, we know that it would eventually lead to Palpatine using either his insane speed or his Force lightning, both of which outclass Dooku. Now, this doesn't mean that Dooku is a chump, it just means that Palps is so overly powered that even Yoda can't beat him. I think the fight would go like this. Dooku would square up against Palpatine, and he would ignite his lightsaber in, one hand, doing the cool twirl thing he did against Yoda.
My foolish apprentice, your abilities blind you. You are no match for the true nature of the dark side.
Palpatine would just fire Force lightning at Dooku, who would just block it with his lightsaber and send an object hurling at Sidious, who would incinerate it with his hand, shooting another tendril of lightning. And as the lightning would bounce back around the room, Sidious would stop the current and raise Dooku into the air as he shocked him with Force lightning and threw him to the ground. Palpatine likes to toy with his enemies and doesn't want to just kill them all super quickly. Dooku would roll to his feet as he would hurl objects at Sidious in an effort to distract him as he hurled his lightsaber at his master with the Force as well, who would merely stop it with the Force, freezing all things in the air, only to ignite his own lightsaber and send Dooku's back towards him.
Fine, you choose your death by blade then.
Dooku scoffs. The two engage in a duel of fire as Dooku uses all of his abilities as a master swordsman against Palpatine, who is not nearly as proficient at Form 2 as the Count is, of course. However, Palpatine's speed and diversity in form mastery makes up for it. He's switching between the 7 forms with each strike, and Sidious pushes Dooku back until Dooku leaps over him like Anakin did to Obi-Wan, however, blocking Sidious's strike in the air for his torso to be cut in half, preventing all of that, simply because he's just that much more experienced than Anakin was. Dooku disarms Sidious with his lightsaber and grabs the Emperor's weapon with his other hand, much like Anakin does to Dooku. Dooku's lips curl into a grin as Sidious bares his teeth and smiles at his apprentice, curling his fingers like spider legs and shooting the most purple Force lightning from them that anyone had ever seen. Dooku screamed in pain and began to char as he turned to dust. Sidious walked through the pile of ash floating in the wind, summoning his lightsaber from the ground and walking away. So I think we all kind of knew the answer to this fight. However, I will say that if they fought one-on-one, lightsaber to lightsaber, I do think Dooku would stand his ground really well. I'm not saying he would necessarily beat Sidious in a lightsaber duel. However, he would stand his ground really well, and it would take some special little bit of luck. Maybe Sidious would trip or something miraculous on Dooku's end would happen, and he would maybe get the upper hand. But resistance is futile, as 7 of 9 would say, as the Borg would say, so it really doesn't matter what would happen in that fight. Dooku could have all the luck in the world, just wouldn't make a difference, because in the end, he would lose. It would all come down to the Force and the power and the sheer will of Palpatine, who is the Shadow. Let me know who you want me to put up against each other next in the next fantasy battle video. I'm going to try to have these actually animated. So you guys remember how I did the Once Upon a Theory animations? Those are still going to happen. We're going to continue with the stories. However, I want to do some actual battles where they just fight each other. We just have random characters fight each other, like Palpatine versus Darth Maul, or Darth Maul versus Anakin, or Anakin versus Mace Windu, or Obi-Wan versus, I don't know. You guys can let me know and we can figure it out. We could even do Mandalorians and stuff like that. I think that would be really fun. So that's something that I'm working right now on with the team. And of course, Vader Episode 2 is also being worked on. That's a completely different team in itself. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know your suggestions down below for the next one, and I can turn these all into animations and have them look really cool and, you know, be fun, entertaining. We can see who would duke it out the best in the Star Wars world. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks for your time today, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Until then, remember, the Force will be with you always.